So I was very interested in the frontline states, which were the countries around South Africa which were supporting the struggle. After Zimbabwe became independent in 1980, then it became a frontline state and gave support to the exile movements. And Mozambique, also, because the frontline states were being attacked by South Africa, they had a very, they sacrificed a lot in support of the struggle. Then Namibia got its independence in 1990. That came along as well. So, I always felt it was very important to support that. This was the 80s when I was doing it, and Thatcher was the Prime Minister here, and Nelson Mandela was a terrorist. That was the position of the Conservative Party at the time.
President Botha had been invited to visit the UK by Margaret Thatcher, and we were organising the objections to this. And there we were getting ready for the demonstration, so we had the sticks to make the placards and everything there. And suddenly these two men burst in. They were looking for a named activist, a guy called Paul Anagan, who had thrown red paint at the embassy. They didn't identify themselves as police. And so, although eventually we found out that they were, but they obviously thought that 2 or 3 of them bursting into the office would have no problems whatsoever. And there were 50 of us in there making placards. So we had these huge sticks.
I was also working in the early 80s for something called twin trading, which was set up by it was the GLC as it then was, under Ken Livingstone. And the idea was to support fair trade and develop ways of trading with poorer countries in a fair way. And they were started off things like the fair trade coffee, which is now in all the supermarkets and all the fair trade goods. And I worked for them for a few years. And then I sort of put things together and thought, well, there's the sanctions campaign, the boycott campaign that we have against apartheid. If you turn the coin the other way, it comes that you come up with fair trade with the frontline states. So that was the idea of AA Enterprises, that we should trade positively as a way of supporting the frontline states who were, having a hard time.
The South African government decided they were going to make black women in South Africa carry passes, and the women objected to this. 20,000 women delegates marched on the union buildings in Pretoria to protest. We decided in 1986 that we were going to have a big event in Finsbury Park to celebrate those women, some of whom were now in exile in the UK, Adelaide Tambo, Tempi Nobudula, and a whole range of others. And we thought, who do we get as the keynote speaker? And Winnie Mandela would have been the obvious person, but she was under house arrest in a village in the Orange Free State called Brantford, and there was no way that the South African government would have let her out at all. So we thought, OK, we need another big name. Who are we going to go for? And someone said Angela Davis. And we went, OK, let's ask her. And we did, and she agreed.
People in the ANC Women's League were amazing. You can't help but be inspired by people like that. And meeting people that Franny Jinwala, she became one of my icons, if you like. She was one of the exiles, very active, very clear. She was, amazing woman, powerful. Nelson Mandela became a focus, not just for himself, but to make the wider point that he in prison represented a large number of people in exile and in prison, the leadership of the struggle against apartheid. But it made it more clear for other people to focus on one individual. And after all, he was somebody who was very easy to focus on because of his very powerful speech at the Ravoni trial and his background and the fact that he had led the Nkonto Sizwe. So there was a lot that we could say about him. He also had a wife who was very engaged with the struggle, still Winnie Mandela, so there was a lot to say about her as well. So it was decided that there needed to be a year-long campaign on his 70th birthday, or around his 70th birthday, called the Freedom at 70 campaign. And we must remember that there was much more to the campaign than just the concert.
Things on the Mandela Freedom March that were incredible. There was a village in Cheshire called Congleton, and the MP, whose name I have forgotten, Anne Winterton, actually told people that they were not to actually support the march because Nelson Mandela was a terrorist, and she forbade it.
There was the walk from Glasgow to Cornwall. There was a large number of activities. The local governments were asked to put up the ANC flag and to name things in the area, which they did. The NUS did the same with their buildings. It was there was a lot going on.
The streets were swathed in green, black and gold colours of the ANC. There was a school choir singing Nkosi Sikelel waiting to greet us. There was a huge meal laid on. We had a Bhangra group with drums, and we had Scottish pipers playing at the same time. So it was probably the noisiest demonstration I've ever been on in my life. And when we got to London, we were greeted by Desmond Tutu in Hyde Park. I actually did the fundraising appeal at the start of that march in Finsbury Park, and we got 29,000 in. And I think there were probably about 100,000 people in and around Hyde Park to hear Desmond Tutu and other people speaking. There were attempts to disrupt the march on the way. Someone in Leamington Spa, it was, decided that he could drive his Rolls Royce straight into us. And police actually did nothing about it.
People just don't think that the anti-apartheid struggle is only about South Africa and only about Nelson Mandela, because it was about the whole region which was affected by apartheid. And Nelson Mandela was hugely important, but because of many, many other people who were involved in the struggle. So that's really something we feel is important to just correct that perception. It wasn't just about Mandela.